Yeah, I've shared because I've done a lot of LGBT activism and centered around a lot of these issues. I've shared my story a lot. As I mentioned before, I grew up in a small rural town uh, in Palmerton, and as I mentioned before, my family faced a lot of financial struggle. So there was already the socioeconomic experience that I had
Mhm.
that was different from some of my peers in high school and middle school. I was also very religious at the time. I went to church all the time. Um, I cared about my religion a lot. And, I always knew I was different, but I didn't know how to explain it. And so when I did finally come out, I faced a lot of backlash from people in my own family. I faced backlash from my faith-based community, which I had assumed up to that point that, I had always learned from them that they accept everybody. God loves everyone, right? And I knew right then and there that I had to do something, right? I had to share my story, my perspective with other people, and I needed to be a leader on these issues to give a voice to those who sometimes feel voiceless. I'm lucky to have an immediate family, my mother and my father and my siblings who support me 100%. And what my story did for me, what my experiences as a person coming out in a small town that was not accepting at the time, uh, taught me is to have empathy for other people. And so that's why I really started getting involved in not just LGBT issues, but I started getting bigger in my activism. I started focusing on uplifting communities of color, started focusing on folks who have disabilities, on uplifting issues that women face, because I see them as very, very connected. And as you know, we are not just one person, right? I am not just LGBT. I also am from a low socioeconomic background. My partner, for example, he's not just a person of color; he's also a member of the LGBT community. He
Mhm.
also knows what it's like to face low socioeconomic status. And my partner has actually taught me a lot about the issues, the culture, the things that people face in communities of color that my eyes otherwise would not have been open to. And what I try to encourage people to do is have an open mind. Put yourself in situations that, yes, we all know tough conversations about race, about equality, it's hard to have, especially if you're someone who's never had those conversations before.
Mhm.
And that's why I think education is so important because higher ed, for example, is a great place to have those tough conversations. And at the end of the day, someone might just change their mind. Even if they don't agree with you in the moment, there have been many people who have heard my story, who I've shared stories with. And going into it, they may have never met an LGBT person. They may not know what it's like to be LGBT or be a person of color. I've created events when I was at Kutztown to have those types of conversations and platforms. Um, and people come back to me later and say, wow, thank you for having this conversation with me. And I think a lot of it, when they come back to me, they're like, thank you for just being kind and also being understanding.
Mhm.
I think the key when we're having these tough conversations with folks who don't understand what it's like to experience racism or homophobia or transphobia or even xenophobia is they need someone who's willing to sit down with them and have a calm conversation that is meant to be educating. When I worked in the LGBT center, one of the major things we talked about was giving people the opportunity to learn,
Yeah.
and holding them accountable for their mistakes. So if they do make a mistake, if they say something off-putting about a group of people, coming up to them and saying, "Hey, I didn't like what you said," not in an angry tone, but saying, I didn't like what you said, and let's talk about why. Let's talk about why this is important not to say these certain things or to have these certain viewpoints. And let me educate you and give you some history, and let them absorb that. I've been able to bridge gaps between people who have never experienced these things and people who have. And what I found is nothing but productive conversations, conversations that have led to good things. And sometimes it ends up with people who have that privilege, who never experienced those things, actually sitting down and advocating for those things. I was really proud when I went to the Black Lives Matter protests and rallies, even in Kutztown and throughout the area. There was a lot of mixture of people from a wide variety of groups coming together once and for all and saying, this is what we got to do. We got to fight for equality. Everyone deserves an equal chance. And I think it's just putting that level playing ground and connecting to someone else who can understand your story from their perspective too. So if I sit down with someone and I share my story, you know, maybe because I shared with them that I know what it's like to lose a home or struggling to pay the bills, they can understand that. They can understand what it's like to be treated differently. A lot of people throughout their life know what it's like to be bullied in school, right? And that's it's playing a level playing ground and coming to consensus and just having those tough conversations. I think people have to have them. And like I mentioned before, our nation is at a state of reckoning. I really do believe we're in another wave of civil rights movements that we've seen, 50, 60 years ago. I believe this is the next wave, and it's happening with young people. You see young people are standing up for this stuff, and we're having those conversations.